Hello and welcome to this video on the VitalStore Software Program. The VitalStore Software Program is concerned with reviewing, editing and printing data from your pre-recorded sessions that have been recorded using the Vital Monitor program. When looked on the desktop, your Vital Monitor program is indicated by a red heart, and the VitalStore program, that is this one, is indicated by the blue heart. Simply double clicking on that blue heart icon will bring you straight into this normal open blank screen. Just want to start off by having a general look at this screen, what it shows and where we can go from here. As you'd expect in a typical Windows program, we have the typical File, View, Tools, Help on the top, and a number of different buttons here and on the top as well, which I'm going to cover shortly. Starting with the File, click on File. We have two main options there, Open and Import. Open is straightforward. It'll open a dialog box that will allow you to open files that have been recorded on this actual laptop, whereas Import allows you to bring files using a USB stick or come in maybe via email and bring those into the software. So if they weren't recorded actually on this actual device, they can be imported and then become part of the recording sessions that are held on this computer. In View, we've just really got some control here of what you're seeing on the screen. Typical Windows things, toolbar, status bar. Also we have an option to hide the sessions. Well, just to give you an idea, this area here is where the sessions are going to be displayed, and so if we hide the sessions, we're going to close that area. Click back on that and show the sessions, and it comes back. The other one there, application look. This is a Windows feature that enables you to configure it to look how you like. And maybe if you want it to look like Office XP or look like Office 2007, then you choose one of these options. In the Tools menu, we have the option to edit the practice details, and this will be pertinent to the details relating to the owner of this software, not the patients, but actually to the owner. So if we're just looking at this briefly, we'll see that this one is registered to Veterinary Services Limited, and here are the address details and contact details for us. And here's the logo. So if this was your practice and you were using this software, you'd put your practice details in here, your practice address, your practice contact details, and you'd put your own practice logo in here, so that when ECG reports or NIBP reports or any sort of documentation that's generated by this software occurs, it'll use those details as headers or footers. Simply change the logo by clicking on the change logo, navigate to your logo site wherever you're holding that information or holding that picture, JPEG image, and then click open, and it'll put your logo in there. Once done, just click OK. Help really only contains one, that's the About VitalStore, and that one will bring up this dialog box telling you the version of the software that you're using. Okay, so let's take a little more look in detail at some of these options that we have on the screen. First of all, let's go to the Open. This is the one you'll use most often. Open opens this rather large dialog box, which initially looks confusing but is really quite straightforward. So we'll start in the top left hand corner. So basically here we'll see that at the moment it's selected for today. The idea being that if you come in here straight away, that you want to probably look at the recordings you've done today. However, you can of course drop this down, look at recordings for yesterday, the last 7 days, last 30 days, and you can also put in a custom date here by entering a particular date. If it was something last year that you want to find, we can put in some information here. Look in between sort of 27th of October, 16th of December, and just see whether there's any files there. And there we find one for the 11th of November. So we can do that, or we can, as we had before, just look at today. We can also do a search with some name strings here. So if you were looking for a particular client, the name of Simpson, then we can look for those, and any that were there of the owner Simpson would be listed up here. So a very quick concise way of finding data if there's lots of data on your system. Otherwise we're just going to ignore that today and just look at today's there we are. So we have 2 for today. Just some qualification on what's going on here. It says here saved in the default location. Unless you have any specific requirements, then when you save files in VitalMonitor, they'll be saved in the default location. It is possible to change that location, and if you did, then other options would appear here automatically indicating where those new locations are, and you can choose to be looking in the default location or those other options if they're listed. Now today we've got two files that have been recorded today, and I've done these as demo versions. So we have this one here. If we click on the one at 13:10 on 24th of February, then we can see that we've got a blood pressure recording, an ECG recording, a phasing, which is a CO2 recording, SpO2 recording, and a temperature recording. And associated with it are a couple of PDFs. So I suspect these PDFs are going to be the anesthetic monitoring report, and if you highlight one and click on show PDF, it'll open up the PDF view on your computer. Let's just make that visible by taking that to 100%. So this is a standard anesthetic report that will have been created automatically during the recording process in the VitalMonitor software. So as soon as you stop recording VitalMonitor, it'll create this anesthetic report for you automatically. We can see here that at the time of the recording that none of the details were filled in, so the names are anonymous, and there's no information on the anaesthetist, surgeon, the procedure, or really much information at all. What is in here, however, is the information on the physiological parameters that were monitored. So we have the pulse ox saturation, we have the end total CO2 down here, we have oxygen percentage up here, and we have, in the normal fashion, we have our pulse values, our systolic, diastolic values, our temperature values, etc., all being recorded along here. So this is automatically generated for you. There are options to add events in VitalMonitor, and these would be here. I'm just going to pop out of this viewer now, close that down, and choose the other file, because what's on the other file is one that I edited after the event to add in the information that's required for the anaesthetist, the procedure, the breed, type, age, sex, weight, etc. So all this information can be added in at the time of the recording in VitalMonitor, but it's perfectly possible to add it later and then recreate the anaesthetic report. And if you do that, then you'll see that you'll end up with two PDFs, but they'd be named appropriately if you put the patient name in. So let's take a look at this data. We click on that, and then we can either click on the OK button, or we can just double click here. And this opens up a session information tab, which shows us all the files that we have here. So we can see that we now have these files that were previously listed in the open dialog box are now shown as session files down this left hand side in this session column. So we have, as we saw, blood pressure, ECG, CO2, SpO2 and temperature. And we can click on any one of the, or double click on any one of these to open them up. Before I'm going to do that, I'm going to just go in and look at the anesthetic report. So we can right click at the top here, up in here, right click on there, view the anesthetic report. And we can view it in the way we had previously. But note here that if we right click, we can recreate that anesthetic report. And this brings up a box that enables us to change where we're logging the heart rate from, changing where we're logging the blood pressure from, the temperature, etc. So a number of options here, also including whether we're going to use average data or spot data for our 5-second entry. So what this means is that obviously in a typical anesthetic record chart, you put the data in about every 5 minutes. Now, because this is a computer, we can look at the data that's occurred in that last 5 minutes and take an average value, or we can choose, if we like, just to take the spot value at that 5-minute point. So we'll disregard anything that has occurred before in that 5 minutes and just take the value at that 5-minute point. Most commonly, average data is the one you want to use. So we would make these changes, click on Save to Session, and then let's say, do you want to print the one page is all printed, do you want to continue? Yes, that's fine. Click on Yes, and the anesthetic report is recreated for us. The other thing that's in the right click tab here is the Properties section. So if we go into Properties, this brings up all of the data relating to that case. And this is mirrored with what you see in the Vital Monitor program, and you could have entered this information in Vital Monitor. So we're able to put in all the identification of the owner, the contact details, address details, etc. We have a pet details section where all the information can be put in there. This ID can be your unique hospital ID or whatever ID you want to use, and then this would be the patient's name. So this was Rover, and any pertinent information. And I've just popped in that this little chap is diabetic, and in keeping with Jack Russell Terriers, is timid and can be a little bit aggressive. So we put that information in there. Make sure that the case data is up to date, and then click OK. And then were we to create another anaesthetic report, it would include all that new data that we put in there. Okay, so let's take a look at something like an ECG file. So we can choose any one of these files and highlight them, and then we just double click and it opens the file up, and we get an indication of the data that's represented by that ECG file. So what do we have? Well, it all looks a little bit confusing, but we'll go through this in stages. So let's concentrate first on what we see on the major area of the screen. This is the actual physiological data, the ECG that was recorded during that case. And we see obviously the ECG here passing across the screen. We have a start time of 13:10 or 10 minutes past 1, 13:10 27 seconds, and we have a scroll bar, which means we can scroll through all of this data to the end. Okay, as a guide, there are some 1 second markers along the bottom, and that'll change as we change the viewing window size. This is the the major part of the screen. That's the ECG trace. Up here, this odd looking thing is actually the trend of the heart rate, and because this was recorded from a looped video, we had a looped ECG trace that was saved on file. We had a heart rate that increased, reduced, leveled off, came back up again, and then the whole loop was repeated, so we get a repetition of this trace, which is why it looks slightly odd. But you'll notice that this is the trend, and we can, if we click and hold our left mouse button down, we can see the time and the heart rate being reported as we drag the cursor across. We can also right click, and then we have many more options open to us. Probably a good point to mention here that in VitalStore and Vital Monitor, very many of the options that you want to execute or perform will be done by the right click. So if in doubt in a screen, just right click and then you'll see the options that are open to you. So here we have window time. What can we do? Well, we can change how we look at the trend. So look at the whole trend. There we are, that's the whole trend now. Very many repeated cycles of that waveform file being read in and displayed. We could also look at maybe just 5 minutes of that trend data, or anything to suit. So able to change what we view across here. And you'll notice that as we did that and changed this little marker here indicates where we are in the window below. So we're a long way into the data. If I put that on whole trend, we can see that now this is maybe a third of the way into the data, and that would accord with where we are here with the scroll bar position here. And as I move this across, the scroll bar position up here moves with it. The idea is that we can synchronize the data. So if I go here and I go synchronize, then it synchronizes the data to where I have my mouse pointer at that point in the file, and synchronizes to the ECG file at that point. So it's just some very simple manipulation you can do with the looking at the trend data. So how do we look at the ECG file itself? Well, on this main screen, you'll see here in this area there's above 3 tabs, and there are 3 ways of looking at this data. So first of all, we have the waveform, which we're seeing here. Secondly, we have what's called the extended view, and thirdly, we have the multi-trace. This is peculiar to ECG because ECG allows us to have these multiple views on the data that we have. Just pop back to the waveform data here.
So what's probably of interest to us as a clinician is to maybe get an idea about how this ECG looks, whether it's what we'd expect, are the parameters within normal range, and we can do some very simple measurements to check that. So I'm just going to right click, bring up all the options, and the first one I have is time. So this time will give the window time for this trace. So if I'm going to set this to 2 seconds, it's going to make the ECG stretched out. There we are. And if I then right click and we go to vertical, give me some options on how I view that in terms of its amplitude or its magnitude. So I'm just going to increase that a little bit. Okay, that's quite good, but I think I could make that a bit bigger, so I'm going to right click, vertical height, make it times 4. Okay, so now I've got some reasonable size ECG. Got a little bit of noise now. I've amplified it on my baseline of my ECG, but I can see a very clear P wave, QRS complex, and a T wave. So what might I want to do? Well, I think one of the things I might want to do is to measure some things like RR interval or P wave height or P wave duration. And this is very simply achieved by clicking here on the ECG data tab. Brings up another window, and I'm just going to make that a little bit more visible by bringing this across here. So I have a number of boxes, the first one being P amplitude. So let's click on P amplitude, and that turns yellow to indicate that we're making a measurement into that cell on that row. And if I bring my cursor over here, as soon as I click, I get a line. If I drag that line down, put that at the top of my P wave, let go, I get another line, drop that down, put that at bottom of P wave, and let go, or click to finish. Now I can see that my P wave amplitude was 0.07 millivolts. If I wish to do another one, let's just scroll a little bit further on, click on another cell, bring that down, bring that one down. There's my second measurement. So I've made 2 measurements, and this one here at the end is the average of that one. So in this manner I can just quickly zip through this file, select a few representative examples of a P wave, make some measurements, and end up with an average at the end. By the same token, I can do this on P duration. It might be better to do the P duration on the best time setting we can put it on, so let's put it here. Click on P duration. There's the start of our P wave. There's the end of our P wave, and stop. Do another one. P wave starts there, P wave ends there. There's our 2 measurements. Here's our average. And we can repeat this for all of these parameters, the PR, the R amplitude, QRS, etc. One measurement of interest is perhaps the RR interval, because there's a couple of ways of obtaining the heart rate. If we go in here to look at the RR interval, we can, in this instance, maybe condense that down, so we've got a few to look at. So I'm going to look at the RR, so I'll take that to be the R, and that's R, that's my R intervals, and that's my heart rate. Let's do another one. There to there. My heart rate's slightly different, so the heart rate's changed between that measurement and that measurement, and it looks like it's changing again, so I'm going to do another one here. There to there, and it's indeed changed, so we've dropped our heart rate from 100 down to 56, and as you recall, this is on a simulator, so we had some variation going on there just to simulate variation in the heart rate. Now what's interesting is that if we were to change the time to maybe 20 seconds, we can see that variability there, that change has gone from there, wide here, closer here. Let's say that we want to measure the average heart rate across this period here. I do that, click calculate mean heart rate, and there we are, the mean heart rate in that period is indeed 57. So over that period it averages 57, which is very close to the one we made at the end. So I want to do a heart rate measurement in a different area. I will go to say maybe here, that, right click, mean heart rate, and their mean heart rate in that area is 85.
So what the software is offering you to do is the ability to make all these measurements, make several measurements, form an average from that data, so we're not just looking at spot values, and form a mean heart rate. And for the observant of you, you probably notice that there's this VVTI thing here which isn't filled in, and you may have seen that in the right click that I've been doing. So we can select an area of data. Actually, let's do this a different way. Let's right click and do calculate VVTI, and we're going to go 10 points to the right of where I clicked, and then we're going to do calculate. So what happens there is, this is the area where I clicked. These are the 10 highlighted points to the right of that data. We can see there's a fair degree of variation there, so we're expecting our VVTI to be fairly high, and indeed we've got a VVTI index value of 9.33. Okay, the larger that value, the greater the variation, and it's a logarithmic scale, so it's not a linear increase, so 18 is not twice as variable as 9, it's many more times variable than 9.3, and the closer we are down to 1 or 0, then the less variability there is. So all these features are, as I said, available in the right click. The calculate VVTI is here. We're going to go in here, I'm going to cancel those just to get rid of those lines. This being a bit of an overview to the VitalStore software, I'm going to stop there with the ECG analysis, but just understand that there are a lot of things that can be done, and one of the last things to show you, having made those measurements, is that we can create this ECG report. So right click and create monitoring report, and here we have the options to create our report. So our sensitivity, so let's put this at 1 millivolt per centimeter. 25 millimeters per second is great. We'll have a report page, a trend page, and a trace page, and at the moment there are 216 pages that could be printed because this was a long recording. So I'm going to come out of here, go back and select an area to print, and change this to a selected option. But we will maintain a 3 lead output. So let's go and make those changes, and then we'll come back. So I'm going to condense this. Yeah, it's at 20 seconds now, so that's as condensed as it can be for now. Let's start here. Select reporting time, set the start time, and you see it's gone grey for the first second. We can't select an area less than a second. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to end here. So that's my end time for my reporting period. So everything that's highlighted now or background is in grey is what was going to be possible to print as a selected area in the monitoring report. So create the monitoring report, and this time I'm going to use the selected times, and it's going to give me 17 pages even though I've done the selection. So let's leave that as it is, and we'll do preview. Say yes. Okay, let's look at the PDF. So here's the monitoring report. So here are some of the things that I measured. I measured the P-wave amplitude, I measured the P-wave duration, and I didn't do any of these, but these would have been filled in by your continued measurements. That's page 1. Page 2, again, looks slightly odd because of the nature of the data, but that's our trend line for our heart rate during the whole recording session. And then we move into our report trace. So these squares are actually will appear printed one to one. So if you print this out on your printer and you select no scaling, in other words it does print it as it's shown here, then these large squares will be 1 centimeter and these tiny squares will be exactly 1 millimeter. And you can see that we've selected to show lead 1, 2 and 3, and this is repeated for the 17 pages. There is some slight offset of this ECG trace where it's actually appearing on the page, and we can change that prior to printing, so we can bring this up to the center and bring these up to the center as well. But essentially we've got all the pages of our selected data here as part of a PDF, and that will be saved as a PDF, and you can send that to a cardiologist or whatever. So we could save this to session, or we could save this report to wherever we want to save it. And we make our selection here as before, save it, and then as I say, send that to somebody else for review. So I'm just going to close that now. Close the reporting time, just going to clear that selection. Let's just go back and just let's say we wanted to send a long report to a cardiologist for review. We're going to create monitoring report. This time we're just going to have lead to only. We're going to put it into landscape, because all we want to see in this one is going to be a long lead to. We don't want a report, we don't want a trend, we just want the trace. And just lead to, that's, well, just for the purposes of looking at this, we'll put this 10 pages long, and we do a preview on that. So you can see that this produces a lead to trace, which is continuous, starting in the left hand side here, running across to here, then carrying on to here, along to here, along to here, and so on for all the pages that we decided to print. Now this can be sent as an email attachment, as a simple PDF to a cardiologist, and they have the whole rhythm strip there for analysis. By the same token, you could, if you really wanted to send them lots of information, be sending them the actual file itself, and they could then download the free software from the Burtons website, do an import on the data that you sent them, and then they'd have exactly the same screen as we're viewing here. So probably going to leave it with the ECG report writing here, just to comment really that there are lots more things that you can do. As you can see here, we can change the ECG leads that we're viewing. So lead 1, lead 2 now, we can change that to lead 3, we can change that to lead 1, etc. So that's probably what you'd expect from a standard sort of ECG software. We can do filtering on the ECG trace. Maybe just go into that very quickly now, just to highlight that. Let's change the time scale to maybe 5 seconds. There we are. So we can see a little bit of that baseline noise. It would be nice to get rid of some of that baseline noise, and we can do that with filtering. So go into the filters, go into settings. Here would appropriately be the best choice. It would be a low pass filter. So the filter to on. We're on one iteration of that filter. We're just going to hit apply, and you can see even with one iteration of that filter, we've actually got a marked increase in the baseline noise there. Notice how the ECG is now turned red. The ECG is turned red to indicate that the filter is in place and that filtering is taking place, because this will at some level, and depending on the amount of filtering you're doing, have an effect on the morphology of these QRS complexes. The lower the filter iteration, then the lesser the effect, but there will always be an effect, and for that reason the ECG is now highlighted in red. But this is on one filter iteration. We could actually increase this filter amount by either changing the number in here or by dragging this up, so we could maybe do 3 iterations of that filter, which is a higher level of filtering, and we hit apply and we get a greater degree of filtering. Now because this is a very small amount of noise, we're not really going to have a huge effect if we keep on filtering beyond that. But if you had a lot of mains interference, then this would be a good place to come in and try and do some filtering to get rid of that. And if it was pure mains interference, we would apply a notch filter, and that's a very effective mechanism for taking out all of the mains noise, and can turn what is essentially a useless ECG into something that's actually useful and able to make some conclusions and measurements on. Okay, so we're just going to put that to there and close that down. Okay, and then even though this is highlighted in red, we now know that up here we're applying a low pass filter at 3 iterations or 3 attenuation levels, and so we know exactly what we're dealing with. Just other things that we can do on the ECG trace. If we look here, we can go to bookmarks, and just to explain what a bookmark is, if we add a bookmark, this is allowing us to put a comment into the file in the post-recorded event or post-recorded status. So this isn't something that was entered while it was actually being recorded. This is something that's done afterwards, and if it's done afterwards, it's called a bookmark. If it's done in real time, it's called an event. There are a number of things you can put into here for your drop-down list. So we got patient workup, gave atropine. Let's add another one. Let's just say move to X-ray. Oops. Move to X-ray, and I'm going to add that to the list. Okay, so now next time I come in, there's a move to X-ray option. Move to X-ray, I'm going to click on OK, and now that bookmark has been put in to the ECG. If we go to the Show Events tab, then we can see that they have one event now added. That's the one I put in there, and move to X-ray. So having added our bookmark, now we want to be able to show where that appears on this screen. We just right click in bookmarks and click on Show Events Bookmarks. We can now see that this is the very point where we first clicked to right click to add our bookmark. It's now shown there, and if we hover over it, we can see that there is a bookmark. We can see the date and the time that it was added, and we can see the text that is associated with it is moved to X-ray. So we can add events or bookmarks to the file as required and fully annotate this file for research or purposes of coming back to look at things we looked at before, whether that be just for an ECG workup or even for just a post-op assessment. What else can we look at on the ECG? So let's have a look. I think we covered the time and the vertical control, the filters and the bookmarks, the synchronize, the ECG, the grid. Well, this allows you to simply put on a grid, so you can eyeball. This is a 1 millivolt marker, and this is a 1 second marker from left to right. That's a very personal thing, whether you want to see that grid or not. We have some options on the colors, so you can change the background color. So if we don't want black as our background color, we could change that to white. Okay, and we change our thing. Merely some sort of changes to improve your viewing ability or your viewing preference. Let's put that back to black. Okay, the other thing we've seen, calculate VBTI, the reporting times, and the creating the monitoring report. So a lot of that's now been covered. So that's one tab, and I think I mentioned at the beginning of this video that we had three tabs down here. So just going to very briefly cover what some of these tabs mean and what you can do with those before we move on to look at some of the other data files. So if we click on this here, this is extended VI, shortened extended view. Click on extended view. So what do we have here? Well, we have an extended view, meaning we look at this in a long-term basis. And just for now, I think I'm going to turn the filters off just to improve our viewing ability. So there we are. Now, what does this mean? Well, we have here the number of minutes per page and the rows per page. So at the moment we have five rows and we're showing 1 minute. But if I wanted to look at a lot of data very, very quickly, I can maybe show 30 minutes of data in one go, which is about what we got for this recording. And as you remember, this recording is an ECG that's on a recorded loop for the demo purpose, and so we've got some repeatability. It's increasing in heart rate, slowing down, increasing, slowing down, and this is the loop you can see being repeated here. But let's say that this is an overnight recording and we're looking at some of this data just to see whether we think there's an anomaly occurring. We may see something here, for example, and we say I want to jump to this point, so you double click on that and it jumps straight to the point in the file where you just double click, so you can then start to analyze or look more carefully at that portion of the ECG. And that's really the main benefit of the extended view, an ability to quickly eyeball, assess and jump to parts of the ECG that indicate a problem. So you may have 2 or 3 hours, maybe 10 hours of ECG. If you want to then look at, we would set this to maybe 60 minutes. So 60 minutes, so we've got an hour for the page, and then all it is a matter of scrolling down hour by hour, looking for anomalies, looking for breaks in the ECG, changes in the morphology of the ECG, changes in the patterns that you can then say, I don't like the look of that, I'm going to jump to that and have a look at it. So that's our extended view. In the multi-trace view, we're having a multi-trace, and this is where for 6 lead ECGs, we have the option to start looking at the different leads, the 3 main leads and the 3 augmented leads. And in here you can change the timescale as before, we can change the magnitude as before, and we can apply filters as before. So we can apply our 1 notch filter there, and we can turn that off here. Okay, we can also synchronize to the trend line to know exactly where we are, and we can change how the screen appears. So this gives us a sort of 6 lead view on the patient data. Very briefly going to just cover these tabs here. The most important one I think we discussed was the ECG data and the option here to make measurements and serial measurements and get an average value. Also I would like to mention, I did mention before, we can put some notes in here that will also appear on any report that we do. So our provisional here is basically to suggest a provisional diagnosis. So we could put in here maybe first degree heart block suspected. It isn't in this case, and there's nothing to indicate that it is, but if we were to go into our create monitoring report, let's just do a very simple single page of the ECG 3 lead. We'll preview that. Oops. Always drop back to there. 1. There we are. I think I have to tab out. There we are. Tab out of that. Okay. 2 pages. Yes. Okay. So my provisional diagnosis comments appear. First degree heart block suspected as part of the monitoring report that was on the first page. So there are a lot of options in what you can do in view and add to the ECG report, the idea being that it enables you to create a report that you can mail to a customer, or actually to if you're a referral practice, to the referring veterinary surgeon, or even have something to show a client in a waiting room and go through to show the measured parameters and the nature of the ECG. So that's the ECG data measurement. The other fields are all relating to the data information that we looked at before, that we access through a different method using the properties, but we can also do it here. So this is the owner's details, patient details, and the case details, and these are the ECG measurements. I think that's probably a quick summary of the ECG properties or abilities of the software. There are a few things I haven't gone into in much detail, but could be covered in a further video. So for now I'm going to leave this, and we're going to look at some of the other tracings and see what we can do with those. Okay, so just before we leave the ECG analysis, I just want to pop up to the top here and show you things like hide the sessions, just so you can use these buttons at the top. So hide the sessions does exactly that. We lost the session information down here. We put that session back. Hide the sidebar. That's all the sidebar information with the owner details, pet details, ECG data. So we can hide that. We can show that again. Hide the trend. We'll take out this top trend bar here. So we just got a lot of ability to maximize what we see on the screen, or optimize what we want to see. Okay, so I'm going to close this one now. Close this down. And we're going to now look at something. Let's look at phase-in. This is the company that makes the CO2 sensor. So we're going to look at the phase-in data. And here we are. So we have our line of CO2 data. So we've got 30 minutes or so of CO2 information. And if we go up here to the trend pane as before and just right click and hold, we'll see that what we're actually getting up here, when we click, we actually get these values reported. So we get an inspired CO2, an expired CO2, and over here we'll get a respiratory rate, and the different values are shown as we move along. So we have an inspired of 0.2% and expired of 5.2, dropping down to 5% expired CO2. So that's just a quick way to look at data and assess it, so you can see the maximum minimum values very quickly. As before, this is done on a window time, so we can change how we look at it, look at the whole trend, we can look at just a minute of trend, etc. So very similar to the ECG, just showing a different format of data, because the format of data is different for CO2. So in the CO2 tab, what can we do? We can do some very similar things to the ECG, but of course not to the same degree. We're not going to be making measurements like we did with the ECG, but we can, if we right click, see all the options that are available to us. So the time and the vertical information is the same as before. Bookmarks are the same. We can add a bookmark in the same way. We can put in a bookmark like patient workup. Okay, we can show that event, bookmark, and there it is. That's where we clicked, that's where it is. It'll now appear in the events here, patient workup. So we're just creating in this file now a CO2 bookmark, which will appear when we open this file at any point. Let's just turn that event off so we don't see that. Okay, what else is there? Well, we can select our breath data. So the phase-in monitor is able to monitor, or has a number of variants. One is a CO2 only, one does CO2 agent and nitrous, and one does CO2 agent, nitrous and oxygen. So on this one I think we have some O2 data, so if I click on the O2 tab, there we have oxygen data. And now you'll see that the top trend has changed to oxygen. We can see inspired, expired oxygen data, and we can see the respiratory rate. And the screen itself is showing the trend, the actual values of oxygen data real time. So we'll just pop that back to CO2. We have a grid we can add in the same way we can add a grid is with ECG, and these are 1% values or 7.6 millimeter mercury values. And of course we can change our units. So at the moment we're in percent, we could go to millimeters of mercury, whichever is your preferred viewing option, or kilopascals. I just turn that grid off. And then we can change the colours as before, and our options include fill trace or line trace. You'll notice here that there's some options for the CCC or color coded capnography. This trace hasn't been recorded in color coded capnography format, so we can't actually show this one in that way. But again, if we want to create a report, we can select report times as before, go to a point in the file, select your start time, go to the point in the file, select your end time, and create the monitoring report. So what I'm going to do is just squish this up a little bit, set a start point here, go on for a little bit, set an end point here, and then let's just create a monitoring report. So 1% per centimeter would be a nice easy display. 25 millimeters per second. We can choose what we want to display. We're just going to display CO2. We'll have the trend, the report, and the trace. Selected pages as 2. Blue for our colour. Of course, you can change this to anything you want. You can make this a yellow or a pink or whatever you want to see on the page, but we'll leave it at blue at the moment and go to previous. So we've got 4 pages. Let's have a look. Right, let's see what we got. So we have nothing to put in our monitoring report, and our trend is very flat, of course, because it was just a simulated data. And then here's our CO2 waveform. So that's time along the bottom, and it's CO2% up the side. Now we notice that this is line only because we got the line selection. So if we want to show that in solid blue, we would just come out of here, and we would we just need to pop to here, and my options, fill the trace, and then repeat that monitoring report. We should just be able to say OK, and there we are. So now there. So if you were trying to look at CO2 waveforms during a period of an anesthesia, or if you wanted to look at this in great detail for research purposes, then this, and like any other trace that appears within this software, you can create a monitoring report and print it out. Save to session. We'll save this file to the session data associated with this session. So a session is a collection of recordings that are made at the same time when a patient's under an anaesthetic or being monitored, and a session holds all the information, the event data information, the time and date, any events or bookmarks that are added, all the data itself, all held together in a bundle we call a session. So normally you would save the session, and that would save that report to the session data, and it would appear as a PDF. Or you can save as, and if you click save as, I think I showed this on the ECG, then you can create a report that can be saved anywhere you like. So this can be exported as a PDF in this manner, or created as a PDF and then sent to somebody else. We do, as before, have a multi-trace option. We haven't got the extended view here, we've got the multi-trace option, so if we had agent, nitrous and oxygen data all together, they would all show. With this particular monitor we had CO2 and oxygen, so we got both of those options showing here. And in a similar vein to the ECG, our sidebar shows the owner's details, the patient's details, and the case data. And all this can be filled in and will be used as part of the report monitoring when the anaesthetic report is created. Okay, so very simply that's the CO2. I'm going to close this one now and have a look perhaps at the SpO2 data. Just click on there. So I think you begin to see the pattern here and understand that this is going to be very similar to what we had before. So at the top we have the trend line. If we click on here, we can see that we've got a saturation up here of 98% and a heart rate over here of 62 beats per minute. As we go across, that varies with the position in the data file. Because it's a trend line, we can view the whole trend, or we can view a portion of the trend. As regarding the ECG, we have the option to make it larger and smaller. We just bring that down in height, and we can of course change how it appears in terms of the colours. Let's change the foreground colour, we'll make that nice and pink. There we go. And then we can add a grid for eyeballing heights more than anything. There are no units in there, that's just a grid for reference purposes and also for time purposes. And as I'm sure you're aware now, we can select report times to create a monitoring report, and I'll just show you what the monitoring report looks like. We go to here, that's 1 second. Go to here, create the monitoring report. We'll do it at a fairly slow speed, and the trend will be, well, we'll leave the trend in there. We've got 3 pages, so we'll just preview that. Okay, so nothing in there at the moment. There's our trend, and here's our pulse oximeter tracings. So again, for research purposes or for analysis purposes, very easy to print that off, send it to somebody, analyze it, or use it for research data or paper inclusion in papers. I'm going to close that there and clear the reporting times. There we are. This time only one tab, only a waveform tab in the SpO2 data, and we have the case, patient and owner details as before. One thing I'm just going to explain here, which is not particularly relevant to SpO2, but just that we've covered a number of things now, and we're beginning to see the use of this for research purposes or review purposes. In tools, there's the option to have what's called add-ons, and here's one that will be of interest, is the export to CSV. So in the export to CSV, this isn't installed on this machine, but if the option were installed, then we will be able to export this data in a format that would be readable by an Excel spreadsheet, so a CSV file, and we can export it in terms of sample data or real data, and we can vary the degree of sampling. So if we were to sample export every sample, we'd be able to recreate the waveform of the pulse ox or an ECG or a CO2 waveform in the Excel spreadsheet. If we were to basically just export trend data, so SpO2 saturation or heart rate data, then we'd be able to recreate the trend. So there are many options for research purposes or evaluation purposes or data sharing purposes where you may want to export all the data in a CSV format. This option is not included in the standard software, as there is a fee for this option because it's involves quite a lot of intense processing and extra information that is not included in the normal package. One of the few ones that aren't automatically included. Okay, so I think we have the idea. We'll close that down now for SpO2 and we'll look at temperature. Temperature, very, very simple screen. We have the same information up before. Notice we have the delta value here showing you the difference between any temperature measurements that have been made. We have the flatline temperature data across here, and we have pretty much the same options as before. The only difference here is we're going to change our units and what we can see. So that's the delta line, that's the T1 line. Our units are going to be Celsius or Fahrenheit, and again we can change the colours and create a monitoring report. And I think by now you've got the gist of what the monitoring report will be, so I'm not going to go into that again. Just to look at the multi-trace, here we just show simultaneously the T1, T2 and delta values. And although this is a very simple data set, it is still possible to add information to the file in the form of bookmarks and information as before. Here we are in bookmarks. We can add a bookmark. So we can add a bookmark. Let's say patient B became mildly hypothermic. Put that in there. Turn on the bookmark so we can see where that's been added, and we've got a couple of bookmarks here. This one is the patient woke up, and this is the patient became mildly hypothermic. So again, following the same sort of pattern as before. So close that, and lastly look at the blood pressure data, which I'm sure you're going to be more than familiar with now. So there's the blood pressure waveform. Our options are much the same as before: change in height, change in display speed, the ability to add bookmarks, synchronize with the trend line, add a grid, change the colours, and create a report in the very same way as we did before. And maybe for completeness I'll just show you what's in the report there. So we can change the sensitivity, the print speed, and the tracing pages that we're going to show, and whether we have a report and a trend line as well. So all very, I hope, now familiar, all following the same sort of pattern, but as I think you'll probably gather, a pretty comprehensive piece of software to enable you to review all of the data that's been produced. And finally, I'm just going to close this and close that and just explain a couple of last things on this page. We have sessions here, and we have two, one called live and one called open. Now, if you were running Vital Monitor and there was a live session being running at the moment, then live would be full of all the data files that have been recorded. And what this would enable you to do was, without stopping the Vital Monitor recording, pop into VitalStore and actually review the data that's been recorded at that point. So if we had live files here, down here, and one of them is ECG, we could double click on the ECG and we would see all the recorded ECG data up to the point where we clicked. So it gives you a way to look at data without stopping the recording, but the ability to look in great detail. Otherwise, any files we open will be shown in the session down here. Okay, and I think the last thing to show you is perhaps the import function how we use import to bring files that have been created elsewhere into our data library. So we import a file by coming up here to the import icon, click on that button, and then I'll come straight to the last point I imported from, but we would typically navigate to wherever we held that, which would probably be on a USB stick if we brought data in from elsewhere, or possibly where we've saved it from an email. So go into here and we go into the final folder of the data. Don't worry about the interim files, they're really of no interest for the import purposes. But here we have a session file, and we have the blood pressure, ECG, the phase in, the temperature file, and the pulse ox file. And in addition, we have an events file, and we have the session file. Now you can click on any one of these. Probably the quickest for the computer is if you click on the session file and click open. Now if it doesn't have a session file, choose any of the files you want to. Once it recognizes that this is a VSF file, it'll look for any associated session files. If they're not there, it'll act accordingly. So if you only have one single ECG file and you want to bring it in, click on that ECG VSF file and then click open. So I'm going to put on a session and I'm going to click open. So it successfully imported the session to this address and tells you where it's put it. Should be need to know, and then you just click OK. And here it appears it's been imported. So this is another one I did a little while ago. So we should have ECG data. Again, this looks like a simulated ECG data, so it's just another imported ECG data, but all the data is there. Because we actually had the session file, then all the data would be here if this had been filled in. So it's a very quick and easy way to get data from one person's system to another person's system. Okay, we're just going to pop that one down like that, and we're back to our blank screen. So that really concludes the quick overview, or relatively quick overview, of the VitalStore software. There's some features that I haven't covered, but if there's something specific that hasn't been covered in this video and you wish to know more about it, do feel free to contact me at Burtons or any one of the clinical team, and we'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you for listening.